Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, picture this. Ever confidently promised yourself you're going to sleep early, only to break that promise completely? You tell yourself, I'm just going to watch 2 episodes tonight, that's it. But before you know it, the sun is coming up and your brain has absolutely hijacked your plans.
I mean, we've all been there, right? It's 2 a.m., you promise just one more, and suddenly you've watched 5. You sit there staring at the screen asking yourself, why am I still watching this? Honestly, who or what actually made that decision? Well, let's dive into this.
Because the answer lies in a genuinely massive number, 90 billion. That's roughly the number of neurons crammed inside your brain. We walk around every day feeling like a single unified you, right? Like there's a single pilot flying the plane and calling all the shots. But what the data actually reveals is that this feeling of unity is just a highly convincing illusion. You are actually governed by a vast distributed army of cells, and the conscious you is completely unaware of most of the things going on behind the scenes.
Section 1. The Sleepwalking Glitch. Moving without knowing.
So, to really understand how this cellular army operates, we can look at a pretty wild glitch: sleepwalking. We usually assume consciousness is an all-or-nothing deal, but brain scans of sleepwalkers show something entirely different. During a sleepwalking episode, the motor cortex, which controls your movement, and the visual cortex are fully awake and functioning perfectly. I mean, patients can walk, cook entire meals, and even drive. But the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for your self-awareness and deliberate decision-making, stays completely asleep. Your body is literally navigating the world without the conscious you actually being present.
Now, you might be wondering, if these parts of the brain can just go off and operate entirely independently, what actually turns the lights off completely when we go under general anesthesia? Well, it all comes down to the thalamus. It's basically a deep brain communication hub. When you undergo anesthesia, the drugs don't necessarily turn off every single brain cell. Rather, they alter the way various parts of the brain communicate by shutting down this specific hub. Consciousness, it turns out, isn't a specific place in the brain at all. It relies entirely on the continuous conversation between these regions.
Section 2. 2 minds, 1 skull. The split brain reveal.
All right, let's see what happens when we intentionally cut that conversation off. This brings us to a mind-blowing series of studies on patients who have had their corpus callosum, which is the fiber bundle connecting the 2 hemispheres, surgically severed to treat severe epilepsy. In one really famous experiment, researchers flashed the word Texas so that only the patient's nonverbal right hemisphere saw it. When asked what he saw, his talking left hemisphere answered totally honestly, "I didn't see the word." But when researchers asked him to draw what he saw with his left hand, which, remember, is controlled by the right hemisphere, he effortlessly drew a cowboy hat. His talking left brain was completely confused by what his own left hand was drawing.
As the pioneering neuroscientist Michael Gazzaniga points out, this astounding act of cross-cueing physically proves that there can be 2 separated minds inside one system. It heavily suggests our feeling of being one single entity is just a carefully constructed illusion. In reality, we might all have multiple entities in our heads, constantly squabbling for control at any given moment.
Section 3. The emotional thermostat, gut feelings, and social filters. Let's move beyond physical brain splits for a second and look at the hidden emotional forces that secretly dictate our everyday choices. Researchers studying behavioral economics, like Luke Chang with his trust game research, have mapped out how emotions physically drive these decisions. Think of the insula as your brain's emotional thermometer. In games where people have to choose between selfishly keeping money or sharing it, the insula measures the social room and triggers gut feelings, like guilt, to keep our selfish, dopamine-driven greed in check. It's basically telling you, hey, you're going to feel really awful if you do that.
But hey, a thermometer just reads the temperature, right? It needs a thermostat to actually adjust the room. And that's exactly where the prefrontal cortex comes back in. It integrates those gut feelings of guilt to actively regulate our behavior and apply our social filters. It is, without a doubt, your brain's master thermostat.
To grasp just how vital this thermostat is, we have to talk about the legendary 19th century case of Phineas Gage. In a horrific railroad accident, gunpowder blasted a heavy tamping iron straight through his skull. Miraculously, his motor skills, his memory, and his language completely survived the trauma. But the iron absolutely destroyed his prefrontal cortex. The result? His personality radically changed. He became fitful, highly irreverent, and completely lost his social filter. This survival was a real game changer because it proved to early neuroscientists that things like morality and personality aren't just abstract concepts floating around in the ether. They are physical, localized functions sitting directly inside the brain.
Section 4. Inheriting your ancestors' trauma. The ghosts in the machine.
Okay, but what if I told you that the unconscious forces pulling your strings aren't even entirely yours? What if they belong to your ancestors? Neuroscientist Bianca Jones-Marlin has done some unbelievable work on inherited trauma. She paired the harmless smell of almond with a light electric shock in mice. Over time, the mice naturally grew extra neurons in their noses with almond receptors to better detect this new threat in their environment. But here is the crazy part. Their offspring, who had never been shocked, never even been exposed to the smell, were born with those exact same excess receptor cells. A traumatic memory physically altered their genetic expression and was passed down via sperm and egg to the next generation. So yeah, you might quite literally be reacting to environments your grandparents survived.
Section 5. The magic of free will. Who moved that finger?
So this brings us to the ultimate mind-bending philosophical climax of our explainer. Do we actually have free will at all? Researchers Yuri Maas and Alice Wong set up an ingenious experiment to test our sense of agency. A subject named Tomas was hooked up to monitors and simply asked to choose when to voluntarily move his finger. The researchers could track the tiny electrical signal of his decision a full 50 milliseconds before he actually moved. But occasionally, just as Tomas made the internal choice to move, the researchers blasted his motor cortex with transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS, physically forcing his finger to twitch on their command.
Now, you'd probably think Tomas would immediately yell, "Hey, you moved my finger, right?" But the twist here is massive. Even on the trials where Tomas had truly internally decided to move his finger at that exact millisecond, the slight interference from the TMS machine made him entirely surrender his agency. He literally reported feeling no agency at all, believing the computer did it entirely. It took almost no interference for him to completely abandon his feeling of being in control. And that leads us to a pretty absolutely crucial point. The brain is, at its core, a meaning-maker machine. Our sense of agency, our feeling of free will, is highly fragile. It's essentially just a story the brain tells itself in retrospect to make sense of what the body just did. The brain looks at the body's actions, takes in the environmental feedback, and retrospectively writes a neat little narrative saying, "Yep, I definitely chose to do that."
Section 6. The power of letting go. Stepping out of your own way.
Now, finding out you aren't the sole conscious pilot of your life might sound a little terrifying, but honestly, relinquishing control is actually the secret to ultimate creativity. Neuroscientist Charles Lim conducted fMRI brain scans on freestyle rapper Chris Emdin to see what happens during peak creativity, and the contrast is absolutely fascinating. When Chris was reciting memorized lyrics, his prefrontal cortex, that conscious self-monitoring part of the brain we talked about earlier, was highly active. But when he was asked to purely improvise, to freestyle, that prefrontal cortex totally deactivated. The conscious part of him just stepped aside. If you over-monitor yourself and inject conscious control into something you already know how to do, you choke. But decreasing that prefrontal activation, that's what unlocks brilliant, unscripted flow.
We spend so much time and energy trying to forcefully script every single detail of our lives with our conscious minds, stressing over every little thing. But as we've seen in this explainer, you are a beautifully complex collection of hidden parts. Your gut feelings, your automatic motor responses, the very wiring of your ancestors, all of that is still you. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to ponder. If the unconscious you is still you, and it's doing most of the heavy lifting anyway, what will you let it do today? Because sometimes, the absolute best choice you can make is to simply let go.